So the point of today is to give everybody introduction to the wellness program, talk about what we've been doing the last 18 months and what you can expect over the last 18 months or over the next 18 months. About a year and a half ago, Chief Million came to the wellness committee and said, historically, all we're doing is buying workout equipment and coming up with workout plans and P90X and things like that. He wanted to expand it to include everything. Mind, body, and soul was his specific direction. So to do that, we came up with two goals. The first one is to get everybody to their retirement date, healthy, happy, able to do whatever they want. Pretty simple. And the other one is to keep everybody out of a nursing home, because it would suck if you retire and then 2 days later you're at Park Vista or at 2031 Pottery. So today what we're going to do, how we've accomplished this goal, it's pretty broad. What we decided to do was identify the things that are putting people in nursing homes, identify all the things that are killing us, identify all the risk factors for each, go ahead and quantify each risk factor, so which one is more important than the others, and then come up with levers we can pull to actually reduce our risk, and which ones are more important and which ones are not important. Pretty basic. So to start, we just decided who's winning the game of longevity, who's living the longest. What you find is that it doesn't matter where you are in the world or how long you live. About 20% of what will kill you or how long you live is determined by genetics, and the other 80% is by lifestyle and environment factors. When you do have a genetic problem, if you affect your lifestyle and your environment, you can pretty much reduce that risk altogether. So the winners of the longevity game, here are the top 10 of the world. The first thing you can learn from them is it's great to be a woman. All of the top 10 there are women. When it comes to any society, if you separate out men and women always win the day. This is the oldest guy to ever live, and he rolled in at like 14 or 15. When you look at the top 100, the vast majority are women. The other thing you can learn from this is the idea of a risk factor. When we go through here, we're going to compare everything to smoking. We all know that smoking's bad for us. Everyone in the department has agreed to that, and we now incentivize people not to use tobacco because of it. So we're going to compare every risk factor to that, and if there's things that are worse than that, maybe we should focus on something other than just smoking. But the reason why you know that it's just a risk factor is because number one there, Jean Calment from France, she smoked her entire life all the way up to 117 years old and never got cancer, never had a heart attack, and turned out just okay. And she ended up being the GOAT. Just because you have a risk factor doesn't mean you can't pull other levers to reduce that risk. These are the longest living societies, if you want to call them that. They're pockets of the world where people tend to live longer than anybody else. The blue zones there are the areas of the world where they have the most centurions, people that make it to 100. The greatest of all time, though, come from this tiny little valley in northern Pakistan called the Hunza Valley. And if you were born there, the average age of death is 100, so you can expect to just live to be 100. So when you look at these, you got to say, okay, what's common amongst all of these, because they're pretty much all over the world. So what's making them live longer than anybody else? Before we get onto that, though, here's how we're doing in the United States. We're barely making the top 50 at 47th there. These are the current running averages for the year, so these aren't solidified yet, but these are the newest we have for 2024 so far. And then you can see 2020 and 2021. These averages are from birth, and if you make it to age 65, you get to add a few more years. And again, you can see it's great to be a woman. So what are the commonalities of all of the people in those blue zones? So the biggest one is they just are constantly moving. When you read a book called Lessons from the Blue Zones, they mention that rarely do they sit down longer than 20 minutes. They're walking to school, they're walking to church, at work, they're always moving. They tend to yield towards plant-based diets. They also have, I forget the name of it because it's foreign, but it basically means they usually stop eating when they're about 80% full. They cultivate social circles, and most of them tend to be religious. They focus on reducing stress, and they don't drink very much. The reasons why these matter the most is because science has come along and said that moving a lot and cultivating social circles and diet and exercise are the 3 best levers you can pull for longevity. So here are the biggest levers you can pull when it comes to longevity. What they are obviously is sleep, mental health, and Vo2 Max. Sleep and mental health are pretty well linked. There's no mental health diagnoses out there that doesn't come with poor sleep habits as a cause of it. National Institutes of Health, lots of health organizations have said those two are so closely correlated that any mental health diagnosis was probably caused or at least contributed greatly by poor sleep habits. What makes this even more sinister is that once you are diagnosed with a mental health problem, there isn't a mental health diagnosis that doesn't come with it causing more sleep problems. So this is the Austin Powers, I'm unhappy because I eat and I eat because I'm unhappy problem, just compounds on itself. Vo2 Max, all that means is the maximum amount of oxygen you can take from the outside air and put it to your muscles to actually do work. So the 3 main factors are lung function, lung size. Once it gets from the lungs, it's got to be pumped throughout the body, so the heart matters, your blood vessels matter, and then once it gets to your cells, your mitochondria matter the most. Your mitochondria, as we all know, make adenosine triphosphate, which is the main molecule that allows you to do any work at all. And the main So these 3 things are at the heart of all-cause mortality. When we go through each bucket of things that are going to kill us later, you're going to see these 3 things in every single bucket. What we've done with this slide is to show you common things that we know are probably going to kill us, things like smoking, coronary artery disease, diabetes, hypertension. This is end-stage renal disease. These are people on dialysis. These are hazard ratios where they compare people like who smoke to the average and say how long, what's the percentage of chance that you're going to die in the next 10 years if you do that thing. These are 10-year time frames. So you can see smoking, if one is average, you have a 41% increased chance of dying of anything in the next 10 years if you smoke. Coronary artery disease, you can see is 29%. Diabetes is almost as bad as smoking at 40%. Hypertension, and then this hazard ratio is 180% increase if you're on dialysis of dying of anything in the next 10 years. So we'll start with sleep. You can see the hazard ratios. 7 hours is kind of where it naters. If you look at the study, it's like 7 hours and 13 minutes specifically. Any time that you get less than that or more than that, your chances of dying of anything go up pretty drastically. 2 things you can see is that poor sleep habits somewhere around high 4 hours, low 5 hours is the same as smoking, and somewhere around 8.5 hours is the same as smoking. So anything longer than that or anything less than that, and you essentially smoked 20 cigarettes that day. When you come over here, this is Vo2 Max. They separate Vo2 Max out into low, which is the 25th percentile. Below average is 25th percentile to the 50th percentile, and then 50% is obviously average, and then above average is 50 to 75. What you can see is that you don't even have to be average. You can be below average, and you can start smoking and still live longer than somebody who is low. If you go above average, and I say that because the only thing that firefighters are better at than the average population is cardiometabolic health. And they measure that by Vo2 Max. So most of us are above average, and you can see at above average, you can go ahead and donate both your kidneys and go on dialysis and still have the same chance of living as someone who's low. If you go to elite, it's not even a game. It's a 5-fold increase in your chance of not dying of anything. So Vo2 Max is the #1 metric you can use that determines longevity. It correlates to longevity better than any other biomarker we have. It doesn't matter any blood work, chest x-rays, cancer screenings, doesn't matter. Vo2 Max is it, and by a lot. As we go through, all the things that are going to kill you and we name all the risk factors. We're going to show you these. Just know that these are the levers because they matter way more than anything else. And this could be why old Jean got to live to 122, even though she smoked, because she reduced her risk so greatly across the board everywhere else. So this, before we get on to what's going to kill you, let's tell you how to stay out of a nursing home. There are three things that'll put you in a nursing home. One is neurodegenerative disease, because 300 South Kitsap Boulevard also exists. We don't want to go there. The other thing you need is the muscle strength to be able to do whatever you want to do in your retirement age. And the second thing you need to do is just to be able to produce enough energy to do whatever it is you want to do. So everybody's going to have a last 10 years of their life. What do you want to be doing with that 10 years if you're not in a nursing home? You're going to need to be able to walk from your car to your house. Arguably, you're going to need to be able to carry some groceries, and you might want to walk on the beach or pick up your grandkid, whatever it is. That's going to require energy. This chart here is, if you take nothing from this class, this is the chart that you can use that will tell you when you're going to make it to a nursing home and how to stay out of it. So let's go through it. And everybody at rest when you're sleeping, the average person uses 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute of oxygen. Vo2 Max is measured in milliliters per kilogram per minute of oxygen. So this is a table for Vo2 Max. You can see the percentiles. You can see the low is down here, below average is here, above average is here, and elite is here. Anything you do other than sleeping is going to require more than that 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. So reading is about 1.8 mets. So when you're sleeping, that 3.5 milligrams or milliliters per kilogram per minute is 1 met. That stands for metabolic equivalent thermogenesis. So if you want to do some general cleaning and light straightening up, it's going to require 2.5 mets. If you want to walk at 4 miles an hour, it's going to require 5 mets. If you want to garden, it's going to require 4 mets. We can do the math then and say 3.5 times 4 is 14, and so that will require a Vo2 max of 14 to be able to do that. I bring up 4 because most longevity experts say that you will need to produce at least 4 mets of energy to be able to do all the basic activities of daily living. But that is just barely making it. So anywhere over here on the table that you see less than 14, those people are necessarily in a nursing home because they can't do the activities of daily living. You can do this with anything you want to do in life. So 14, like I said, isn't going to get you carrying in your own groceries because arguably your grocery sacks are going to be somewhere around 15 pounds, maybe 8 pounds in each hand. And that's going to require Vo2 max of 17.5. So anywhere that you see less than 17.5 on this table, go ahead and get your neighbor kid on speed dial because he's going to have to help you carry in your groceries. Some other numbers to focus on are stairs. If you want to have a second floor in your house, you're going to need a Vo2 max of 28. 8 times 3.5, 28. Anywhere on this table you see less than 28, go ahead and check off your second floor privileges in retirement because you will be maxed out to be able to get up the stairs. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't, but you will be anaerobic, and not too many people can last very long anaerobically. So how do we stay out? You can see that an 80-year-old has to be elite to be able to have a second floor in their house. Somewhere in their 70s to early 80s, they lose those privileges. So how do we make it so that we can be in our 80s and 90s and still be able to do whatever we want? Most longevity experts say make a list of what you want to do in those last 10 years, and it will fall somewhere between 4 and 10 mets. And if you can produce 10 mets, which is a Vo2 max of 35, then you can pretty much do anything you want in retirement. So how are we going to get there? What I can tell you is the average 40-year-old if you go down here to this table and look at the 50th percentile, has a VO2 max of 35. I can tell you that, well, let me back up and say there are two ways you can get to be elite in your 90s. The first way is you can simply just work out a whole ton and get your VO2 max high. And what I can tell you is that VO2 max will fall off 10% per decade after the age of 40, which is why the average 45-year-old, we're focused on 35, because after that, on average, you're going to lose 10% per decade. So if you are 35 at 40, just go down this list and you can see where you'll lose the ability to do any of these things. As somewhere in their 60s, between their 50s and 60s, the average will lose the ability to go upstairs. And they will probably enter a nursing home somewhere in their 80s because they can't produce enough VO2 max. So to be able to be elite, what I can tell you is that a 45-year-old who has a VO2 max of 50 will probably be working out about 14 hours per week, about 2 hours a day, to be able to maintain that. We're going to talk about how to maintain your VO2 max later, but 80% of that work will be in something that's called Zone 2. Zone 2 cardio is the #1 factor that affects your VO2 max. We're going to go ahead and say that this guy is going to, we're going to go ahead and overestimate and say he did all 14 hours at Zone 2. I can tell you that this guy can probably produce 10 METs, somewhere around 9.8 to 10 METs in Zone 2. If he does that for 14 hours a week, he's produced 140 MET hours of work. And this is where the people in the blue zones will always win against a professional athlete every day of the week. Because if you are average in the blue zone at 35, you're probably producing about 5 to 8 METs at Zone 2. And if you look on the table of 5 to 8 METs, what that means, it's mowing your lawn. That's walking up a 3 to 5% grade at 3 miles an hour. It's walking with a 15-pound load. It's walking 4 miles an hour. It's nothing. The people in the blue zones live in Zone 2, the thing that affects VO2 max the most. We can do the math on that and say, okay, if they're living in Zone 2 and they're never stopping moving for longer than 20 minutes, let's underestimate and say it's just an average work week and they only spend 40 hours in Zone 2. 40 times 5 is 200 MET hours of work, way more than the professional keeping their VO2 max high will ever do. So if you take home nothing from this, take home that all you need to do is just simply move more and you will be able to have a better VO2 max as you get older. You don't have to necessarily be elite and be in the gym all day. So the two ways again are you can get yourself elite and then let nature take its course, or you can just continue living in Zone 2 and prevent the fall off of that 10% per decade. If you start at 35, maybe you'll only lose 1% and you're here. And as you get older, you climb the chart of percentile till you become elite simply by just moving, anywhere from walking up the stairs to any of these other things. So at the end of the day, the take-home message is move a lot and don't sit down much in retirement, and you won't have to go to a nursing home. This was highlighted yesterday. We went on a 97-year-old male who lives on his own and is walking just fine up the stairs. I asked what his secret was, and he said he plays golf every day. So he's just walking around 3 miles an hour every day, all day, keeping his VO2 max high, and he's just fine at 97. These metabolic equivalent charts are everywhere online, so decide what you want to do in your last 10 years. Go in there, put that thing in, and the metabolic equivalent, it'll tell you, and then you just times that by 3.5, and you know what VO2 max you need to be able to do that in retirement. At the end of this year, during our wellness physical, everybody's going to get their VO2 max number. It'll be a predicted number, unfortunately, because we don't have the money this year to pay for true CPET VO2 max testing. I will show you where to go ahead and get that done if you want to. Because it's a much better test, and we'll talk about why later. But everybody's going to get a number, so wherever you land here, so let's just say you're average 40-year-old and you land at 35, whatever it is you're doing right now to get that VO2 max, keep doing that, and you can just march down the chart here and figure out when you're going to have to go to a nursing home, and this says somewhere in your early 80s. If you want to climb up the VO2 Max chart to the elite, we'll show you how to do that by doing specific workouts. All right, so now we know how to stay out of a nursing home. We're going to talk about all-cause mortality, all the things that are killing us, and all the levers we can pull to reduce that risk. But just remember back to those three things. Those three things matter more. So if you are doing anything other than those three things, you're stepping over a $100 bill to get to something else. We can argue that smoking is worth 41 bucks because your chance of dying of anything goes up by 41%. But those other things are way more important. So if you spend an hour driving to your doc to get a blood pressure med and then another half hour to go fill that script and you didn't do that hour and a half of zone 2, you did it wrong. You should be doing the zone 2 before you get the meds. Now you should be doing both, right? Because we want to reduce all the risk, but some matter way more than the other. So here are the top 10 things that are killing everybody by age. These are small, it's kind of tough to read, I do apologize, but I wanted to get the whole table on here. What you can see is before the age of 65, unintentional injury and suicide rules the day. There's homicide here everywhere, but we can't do much about that from the Wellness Committee, but we can talk about unintentional injuries and suicide. So before we retire, we're going to be focused on those two things. After the age of 65, it's the diseases of aging that kill everybody. Where age itself is a risk factor, the older you get, the greater chance you're going to die of it. So things like heart disease, cancers, infections. You can also see you can start linking some of these things up. Heart disease and cerebrovascular disease, stroke, are caused by the same thing, namely plaque inside your arteries or atherosclerosis. So those two things are caused by the same thing. We can throw them under the same umbrella. Same thing with diabetes and liver disease. The number one cause of liver disease now is called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Both diabetes and that are caused by insulin resistance. One is insulin resistance in the muscle, the other is in the liver. So you can go ahead and link those two. You can arguably even link nephritis here, kidney problems, because the vast majority of people with diabetes end up with kidney problems. But when you link all these things together, you find that one of 8 things is going to kill everybody in the room. It doesn't matter what age it gets you, there's still going to be one of those 8 things. The only difference is what age that you get diagnosed with that thing. So if we use heart disease for an example, you might get a heart attack in your 40s and survive, but you're living with a disability and your chance to go to a nursing home skyrockets. And if you get a heart disease or you get a heart attack in your 90s, it usually kills you pretty quick. So the older you get, the quicker these things will kill you and the least amount of chance you're going to end up in a nursing home. So the idea here is just to put off the inevitable, which is those 8 things killing you, and the longer you put it off, the better the chance you're going to stay out of the nursing home. So what are the 8 things? Here they are: mental health, ASCVD, that's atherosclerotic cerebral vascular disease, cancer, diabetes, aka metabolic diseases, neurodegenerative disease, unintentional injuries, infections, and lower respiratory disease, COPD. If you see anything in red here, being a firefighter increases your chance of dying of that thing so much that the state of Washington has said that's a presumptive illness and it's the job that did it. Some things about presumptive illness is you can't be using tobacco, thus comparing everything to smoking. If you use tobacco, it's not a presumptive illness. Some other things are that presumption lasts for 3 months for every year that you work past the age of retirement. So if you work for 10 years, you're good for about 30 months after you retire. They cap it at 60 months. So after 5 years after retirement, they say just old age got you and it wasn't the job. So now we're going to go through each one of these buckets, look at the risk factors, and figure out all the levers we can pull to reduce our risk. We're going to start with mental health. Mental health, as we said, is one of the biggest levers you can pull because it actually increases your chance of dying of all of the other things. We can talk about the pathophysiology of why between each one of these things, and we'll do that later in the year when we focus on this class. But for now, I'll just do one example. We'll just call it metabolic disease. If you have a mental health diagnosis, your cortisol is going to go up. That's a stress hormone. If your cortisol goes up, it makes your liver secrete more insulin, or excuse me, more sugar. Higher sugars mean more insulin. More insulin means more inflammatory markers. means metabolic disease. So just having a mental health problem will increase your chance of getting a metabolic disease significantly. We can do that same pathophysiological thing down each one of these, but this is a 2-hour class, so we won't. I was just giving you one example. Some of the risk factors, shift workers. Anytime you see shift worker, just input firefighter, because if you look at any study on shift workers, we are the definition. It's usually firefighters, police officers, doctors, nurses are in the definition. Shift workers, it's because of the sleep issues. All of the things that are causing metabolic disease from mental health, the same pathophysiological thing is happening when you don't sleep, namely cortisol, and all of the byproducts of that. Socioeconomic status matters, so being poor sucks. History of traumatic events, that's us, right? Everything we see. Loneliness. Loneliness is the biggest risk factor for mental health problems. The longest study ever done in the history of humankind that's still going on started in 1930s. It's run by Harvard, and they started tracking 800 people. They're now tracking their kids and grandkids and great-grandkids, so they're up to thousands, and they're tracking them throughout their lives just to figure out what's making them happy. If you're happy, you tend to not have mental health problems. And what they found is every single marker that they could come up with across the board throughout a lifetime, loneliness was the biggest factor for happiness. And we all know that because you need a support team, a peer support team, or you need your person you go to when you're having issues. When you talk about, we have Found Therapy here, talking to them about this. They agreed that one of the biggest strengths we have in the fire service is the coffee table in the morning. Just sitting around the coffee table, talking to people and interacting keeps us from being lonely. It's the biggest thing we can do to combat mental health problems, so we shouldn't ever get rid of the coffee table. The other thing they say is go ahead and have a person, one inside your profession and one outside your profession, because anybody outside your profession probably isn't going to get it the same way somebody inside your profession is. So if you do have a problem, go ahead and have a person, like I said, inside or outside. Family history matters. There are some genetic components and chronic medical conditions. So if you get any one of these other things, it's also going to increase your chance of mental health problems. Again, which is why mental health is one of the biggest buckets. So here are the numbers. According to Nancy, these are the number of personnel here at South Kitsap that qualify for these percentages. So that means somewhere in the next 30 years, 85 of us will have negative or intrusive thoughts affecting your social life. 23 of us will get PTSD or depression. 21 of us will consider suicide. And 6 of us will put a gun in our hand and have to make a hard decision. If that's you, make the decision to call your one, right? Call your person, whether that's at work or at home. So before you go down this rabbit hole that gets you to here, identify who that person is so you can call them when you get there. If you do get there and you just don't have the numbers, we have a peer support team for that very reason, so use them. Ideally, you'd be wanting to bring in peer support or your person when you're up here before you start going down this rabbit hole of issues. But if you find yourself going down that rabbit hole, the further you get down, the more necessary calling that person will be. All right, ASCVD. So atherosclerotic cerebral vascular disease, this is anything that is plaque inside your arteries. It all starts with a lipoprotein. We've heard of HDL, LDL, high-density lipoprotein, low-density lipoprotein. Inside lipoproteins is a bunch of triglycerides, aka fat, right? That's why we track triglyceride levels in our blood. Fat and water don't mix, so to get it around your bloodstream, you need to wrap it in a protein, thus lipoprotein. When it comes to lipoproteins, there are only 2 you should care about. You shouldn't care about HDL, and you shouldn't care about LDL. You should care about this thing called ApoB100. All ApoB particles are LDL particles, but not all LDL are ApoB. The American Heart Association and every single lipid organization on the planet says ApoB is the cause of atherosclerosis, and that is what we should be testing for because it is more predictive than LDL, it is the cause, and it's actually a cheaper test. So on our wellness physicals this year, we've asked for them to test for ApoB because historically all we've done is test for LDL. The other thing we're going to test for is this right here. These things are called kringles. One of these kringles is called LP(a), lipoprotein(a), and it is a genetic component, and it comes from the gene LPA. If you have this, this particle is 6 times more atherogenic than ApoB. It is attached to ApoB particles. So whatever your risk factor is cholesterol-wise based on ApoB, if you have LP(a), times that by 6. The people who have this, these are the 45-year-olds dying of heart attacks. These are the people needing aortic valves in their 50s and 60s because LP(a) tends to cluster on your aortic valve. So they tend to get aortic valve stenosis and need a new valve. Unfortunately, in this country, it is not recommended to test for LP(a) till after you have a heart attack. So basically saying don't stop smoking till after you get lung cancer seems kind of weird. Most other countries and folks in Europe say test for this once in your life. Once in your life because it is genetic, it's stable at the age of 5. So anytime after 5, whatever you test for, that number will be the same at 65 as it is at 15. So it doesn't matter, you only need the test once in your life to know if you have it. The only thing that will reduce this, unfortunately, is a class of drugs called PCSK9 inhibitors. They are expensive, and our insurance currently, I don't believe, pays for them. But at the end of the day, you can't do much about this other than to say, if you have it, focus on every other risk factor, be hyper-focused on them. Reduce your risks across the board because you already have this thing here that sucks. 20% of us have this. 20% of the US population does. It is more prevalent in anybody of African descent or Southeast Asian descent. So if that's you, your risk factor is a lot higher. We have gone ahead and asked that we also test for this on our wellness physicals now. But once you get it tested once, you won't need it again. So we're only probably going to do it once per person. So we are doing that? We've asked for it, yes. And if we don't, I don't know why, because those tests are cheaper than LDL. So it can't be a cost. But I did ask the wellness, and they said they can test for anything. We just have to tell them. So let's go through the process. Here's inside your arteries. Here's your artery wall. Here's beneath your artery wall. As your blood's going through, you got your ApoB particles. They get in between the endothelial space and get underneath the endothelium. They're not too sinister yet until they become oxidized with an oxygen-free radical. This is the idea behind antioxidants. Once they do become oxidized, your immune system recognizes them, and a type of immune system cell called a macrophage eats up that ApoB. As it eats up more ApoB, it turns into what they call a foam cell because it looks like foam under the microscope. That is the waxy buildup you get on the inside of your arteries. Over time, then calcium deposits go in there and you get a calcium lesion. This is why we test for our cardiac calcium score. Anytime you get a non-zero number on the calcium score, you have calcium in your artery somewhere. They give you averages, so if you're a 45-year-old or whatever, this number is average, but as long as that number is not 0, you have calcium there. So this process has already begun. So that is the entirety of, I guess we'll go a little bit further. As that calcium lesion builds up, it reduces the size of the artery, thus you get decreased in the ability to flow blood through there. And then over time, this endothelial cells get damaged, you form a clot, the clot breaks off, and you get a heart attack or stroke. That is atherosclerosis. That is all it is. There's nothing more. So as we go through here, you can see why these risk factors are. Hypertension is a big one because hypertension is the thing causing the damage to your artery wall. This is Pump Academy 101, straight out of friction loss charts. The higher the pressure, the more the friction loss. The friction loss is caused by eddy currents on the outside edge. It is those eddy currents that are damaging that arterial wall. Diastolic hypertension is worse than systolic. If you have a diastolic hypertension above 100, your chance of having a significant coronary event in the next 15 years is above 90%. And those events are heart attacks, strokes, or death. So if you do have a diastolic hypertension, you really might want to pull that lever. Chronic inflammation, because the more your immune system is activated, the more immune system cells are there. Higher the number of ApoB or Lp(a), the more those particles are getting in there. Smoking damages the endothelial wall, obesity, stress. And then there's metabolic syndrome. The reason why I bring metabolic syndrome up is because that is the most predictive of having a heart problem that there is. So predictive that when they talk about cardiovascular health, they don't say cardiovascular health anymore, they say cardiometabolic health. So when I mentioned that firefighters are better than the average person at cardiometabolic health, this is what we're talking about. So you can see these risk factors of obesity, high blood lipids, high blood glucose, metabolic syndrome. These are the most important predictors of ASCVD. You have this, your chance of getting ASCVD shoots through the roof. So what is metabolic syndrome? It is these three of these 5 things. If you have 3 of these, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, excessive fat around your midsection, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, if you just have 3 of those, you have metabolic syndrome. What this comes down to is your mitochondria and that thing that makes ATP. When I said mitochondrial health is the most important for overall health, this is what I mean. So how does that work? Metabolic disease is at the heart of all-cause mortality. Every bucket of thing that will kill you is greatly reduced or increased if you have poor metabolic function. So this is your mitochondria. Your mitochondria make ATP by either carbohydrates or fats. You can make 138 ATP from one fat molecule. You can make about 28 ATP from one glucose molecule. So you get way more energy out of fat than you will ever get out of glucose. The byproduct of glucose metabolism is also lactate. The mitochondria can recycle lactate to make more ATP. The total contribution between carb ATP, fatty acid ATP, and the recycled lactate ATP is Vo2 Max. So when we talked about Vo2 Max being the biggest marker, mitochondrial health is the biggest thing that's going to affect that. And when we talked about zone 2 cardio being the biggest thing that affects metabolic health, zone 2 is the maximum heart rate you can have that will use fats for fuels, making all that ATP. So the more you can make your mitochondria use fat for fuels, the more energy you can produce, the higher your VO2 max will be. So we can see the second, what mitochondrial disease is your mitochondria partitioning glucose abnormally. The more your mitochondria use sugars for fuel and not fats for fuel, the more metabolic disease you have. And this is why it's such a big factor for ASCVD, because if you can't use fats for fuels, the fats back up. They got to go somewhere, so they go into your bloodstream or into your liver or into your cells or whatever it is. And so that's going to cause high blood lipids. If you are partitioning sugars more, you're going to have higher blood sugars. You have higher blood sugar, you're going to have high blood pressure. You have high blood sugar, you're going to have high insulin. High insulin is going to mean more inflammatory markers. So this is why metabolic syndrome is such a huge predictor of ASCVD, because it causes high blood pressure and high cholesterol and the inflammatory markers, which are the biggest predictors for ASCVD. So metabolic disease and cardiovascular disease are just as linked like mental health and sleep is. But we're going to go through each one of these buckets as well. And when I talk about metabolic disease, we're going to talk about why it's such a big risk factor. Namely, if you have metabolic disease, you are giving, if we're talking cancer, your body the environment cancer wants to grow in. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but this is the most important factor of all-cause mortality. The greater that you can have, or the more mitochondrial health you have, or the better mitochondrial health you have, the better overall you'll be. But it's not just like going on a keto diet and making your mitochondria use fatty acids, because you're going to lose the top end over here of carbs. You do need to have a balance between the carbs and the fatty acids, so it is a balance. That balance is called mitochondrial flexibility. Moving on. Cancer. We all know what cancer is. It's just mutated genomes, right? If you get a stimulus that mutates, your chance of cancer goes up. The more mutations, the more chance that that cell and that genome is going to turn into a malignant cancer cell. There are three buckets of risk factors. One is exposure. So just being exposed to a carcinogen. Smoking is number one, but remember that chart of obesity. Obesity is right behind it, 41% versus 40%. There's UV radiation, medical radiation. To put numbers to that, 50 millisieverts a year is what the American Cancer Society says is the most amount of radiation you can get. The highest amount of radiation will come from a CT scan. Those are about 20 millisieverts, unless you're getting that CT scan over in Eastern Washington somewhere. The older machines are about 40 millisieverts. So you can see more than 3 CT scans a year and your chance of cancer skyrockets. There's other things that can expose us to exogenous molecules like PFAS and volatile organic compounds. A note on PFAS, since PFAS in bunker gear is such a hot topic. PFAS in bunker gear does not cause cancer in firefighters. Those studies are now out and they are going to be given to the IFF, I believe, in April. So PFAS in bunker gear isn't an issue. We don't have to worry about it. We do have to worry about PFAS, but not the ones in the bunker gear. VOCs, volatile organic compounds. If anybody saw the air test that we were doing at Station 8 recently, we were testing for VOCs. That was a prototype test. Station 8 came back just fine. Once that becomes not a prototype and it's commercially available, we'll be getting that for all the stations just to test for that to make sure our air is good as far as VOCs are concerned. Alcohol is an exposure to cancer. I put it in exposure instead of environment in the body because it is a dose-dependent thing. The more alcohol, the greater the chance. The less alcohol, the less of a chance. And then there are a bunch of genes involved as well. BRCA genes for breast cancer is a pretty ubiquitous one out there. So then there's the environment in the body, metabolic disease. And metabolic disease because of obesity, right? So that environment is the environment cancer wants to grow in if you have metabolic disease. Cancer divides and spreads so fast that it needs lots of ATP, so it favors glucose and lactate. Cancer likes lactate a lot, so the higher your sugars, the higher your lactate, the more cancer wants to grow. So it's like saying you're going to throw a bunch of mold spores up in the Northwest and expect mold not to grow. It is the environment it wants to grow in. So if you put your body in that environment and you get a malignant cell, well, it's happy as a clam. Then there's defenses. Defense against cancer. Everybody has malignant cells rolling around their body. One of the main cells, immune system cells that takes those up and gets rid of them is called an NKT cell. That stands for natural killer T cell. If you go one night without sleep, your NKT cells drop by 70%. So you can see that being a firefighter gives us a much greater chance of cancer because we're exposed to it more. You get no sleep and you're giving it the environment it wants to grow in, and you get no sleep and your defenses go away. So I'm pretty surprised that our numbers are what they are and they're not greater because being a firefighter just puts you in a position where cancer wants to grow. So what are the numbers? Here they are. 1 in 3 of us will be diagnosed with it. 50% of us are going to die of it. Your lifetime risk as a man is 41, and as a woman it's 39. As a firefighter, just add 9% to this number because we're 9% more likely to get it, and we are 14% more likely to die of it if we do get it. Over here, we're talking about the power of early detection because you can see if you catch the cancer early, your chance of living is pretty good. These are some of the most common cancers in firefighters, and you can see if you catch it in stage 1, you got a pretty good shot. But if you don't catch it in stage 1, you're kind of screwed, and those numbers don't look very good. The reason I bring this up is because this year's Wellness Physical, we will be taking ultrasounds to your organs and just looking for the cancer. There are pros and cons to that, though. I thought that that was probably the best thing we could do until I talked to Dr. Eakin about this, and he informed me otherwise. And the problem with this is that there is a crap ton of false positives. So to give an example that's not ultrasound, if you do a full body MRI, which is pretty aggressive thing to do to look for cancer, it will find all the cancers. The average person who gets a full body MRI comes back with 3 potential problems. We know that not everybody has cancer, but everybody's got 3 potential problems, so there's a crap ton of overdiagnosis. The problem with that is if you find something, people tend to want to just hack that thing out of there. And so if it finds prostate cancer or a possible problem, it's easy to say, we'll just hack out the prostate. but then, impotence sucks, so maybe they didn't need to take out the prostate, maybe I didn't need to become impotent, right? The same thing goes with thyroid cancer. We're getting a lot of thyroid cancers in the fire service, but there's a lot of overdiagnosis of that as well. The same thing happens with ultrasounds. And so the people who are going to be doing our ultrasounds this year are going to actually tell you, hey, look, we're going to look for it, and if we find something wrong, please don't take this as the only thing you test for. If you come back as a potential problem, please go get another test that confirms it, because if not, it might be a false positive, and there's a high percentage that it could be. So we are going to look for it because they do actually find a lot of cancers. The company that is doing it is called LifeScan. That's who's going to come and do our physicals. They do over 600 fire departments in the country, and they are finding cancers all over the place. So it is a good thing, but they're also finding a crap ton of false positives. So we are going to try and get better at early detection, but it is not foolproof. Neurodegenerative disease. It doesn't matter which one of these which one of the diagnosis that you have. It all just means your neurons are dead and they ain't working anymore. If it's Alzheimer's, the problem is beta amyloids and tau proteins causing the death of the neurons. In mad cow disease, it's a clump of proteins called prions. In Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's, it's Lewy bodies that are the problem. It doesn't matter what it is. It all equals dead neurons. So there's a lot of risk factors to that. There's genetic ones. We're going to talk about ApoE4 for Alzheimer's here in a minute. But ApoE4 allele, if you have that, your chance of Alzheimer's goes through the roof. Down syndrome, you got a way bigger chance of Alzheimer's than anyone else because chromosome 21 encodes for amyloid proteins, and that's the problem with Alzheimer's. 50% of Down syndrome people end up with Alzheimer's. Parkinson's disease, you can see the genes associated with that. But let's go back to genetic. Everyone has an ApoE or an ApoE allele. It is genetic. There's ApoE2, ApoE3, and ApoE4. If you have ApoE2, it's protective against Alzheimer's. ApoE3 does nothing for you either way. And ApoE4 increases your chance significantly. If you have 2 copies of ApoE4, one from your mom, one from your dad, you have a 10 times greater chance of getting Alzheimer's than the average. So 10 times is a whole heck of a lot. But even though you have this, doesn't mean you're going to get it because we can show you how to reduce your risk almost down to 0 if you do. Everybody knows Chris Hemsworth, Thor from the Marvel series. He has 2 copies of ApoE4. He was in a documentary series called Limitless on National Geographic. The longevity experts on there found this in his blood work, and they said, hey, do we even want to tell him, right? Would you even want to know that you have that? They decided to tell him. He decided to make it public, and so they did. But his chance is probably pretty low because we're going to go down these lifestyle factors and show you how to reduce that risk to almost 0. So you can see the risk factors are pretty much the same as all the other buckets of things that are going to kill you. Metabolic syndrome is the biggest risk factor. So again, that big lever you can pull to keep that mitochondrial healthy. But if you manage your diet, aren't sedentary, don't have metabolic syndrome, get good sleep, don't smoke, and control your blood pressure, your chance of getting any neurodegenerative disease drops by 40% just by doing the things you need to do. If you take your homocysteine levels from 13 to 9, you get another 20% decrease. That's going to be your vitamin Bs, B6, B12. If you have appropriate DHA levels, so those are going to be your omega-3s, your fish oils, you get another 20% reduction. And if you are strong, aka Chris Hemsworth, if you're in the top 10 percentile of strength compared to the bottom 10 percentile, you have a 70% reduction of any dementia known to man. So if you take that 40% and then another 20% and then another 20% and then another 70%, I'm not an actuary, but that's going to get pretty close to 0 even if you have these problems. I bring up cognitive reserve because lots of people on planet Earth have beta amyloids and tau proteins or Lewy bodies, but if they have more cognitive reserve, aka more neurons attached to other neurons, then their chance of being diagnosed with those diseases is lower. The number one thing that helps neurons connect to other neurons is exercise. A couple of the levers we're going to pull later is going to show you how to focus on cognitive reserve. These are things like just learning something new, whether it's an instrument or another language, or we're going to talk about Thomas Sager's insane ability to memorize roads, because that helps as well. Injuries. Separated these into young and old. The young is what we're going to focus on because that's what's getting us to retirement. We mentioned that this is the number one thing keeping us getting there because that's your number one risk as far as death goes. Sleep is the biggest contributor to injuries. So let's talk about sleep and BAC levels. Sleep works, the circadian rhythm of sleep works like this. You get a cortisol pulse about 90 minutes before you wake up. 16 hours later, the cascade of chemistry that happens releases melatonin in your brain that makes you sleepy. But throughout the day, adenosine is building up. That adenosine triphosphate we talked about from your mitochondria, adenosine is the core of that. And as you use the energy, the adenosine's left over. So as it builds up, it makes you feel sleepy. Adenosine inhibits glutamate. Alcohol inhibits glutamate, so you can link the two, and they've done this over and over again in studies, and they can say specific hours of sleep equals specific BAC levels as far as neuromuscular control, cognitive function, all of these things. What they can tell you is after 17 hours of being awake, you have a BAC of 0.05. I bring that up because we have a 0.04 policy here. So if you wake up at 6 a.m. by 11 p.m., you are above that limit. Somewhere between hours 17 and 24. At 24 hours, it is between 0.1 and 0.12. So if you get no sleep, then you are drunk driving home, or you're drunk doing anything in the back of the ambulance or fire truck or fire scene. But we don't all just get good sleep or no sleep. There are some intermediaries there. Less than 4 hours of sleep equate to accident rates of BAC of 0.15, so that's no good. The studies from AAA and the National Highway Transportation Safety Board says if you get less than 1 hour of sleep, you are not fit to be behind the wheel of anything. So when we are on calls in the middle of the night here, just understand that your BAC levels are up. This is also going to be one of the reasons behind our exercise protocols, because the things that are affecting those levels can be reduced with, you guessed it, zone 2 cardio, and not things like HIIT workouts, because high intensity workouts will make that worse. So our workout recommendations post shift will incorporate that. Obesity matters. These are firefighter numbers. These are not general population numbers. If you are an obese firefighter, your chance of getting an injury goes up 160% for men and 73% for women. Just being overweight is 90% for men, 53% for women. Hydration status matters. We're going to focus on this. I think we're all athletic in some regard, that we know the performance decline that happens with dehydration and the cardiovascular problems. You do get an increased risk of cancer if your hydration status is off. So we're going to be focused on that this year, and we're going to be having machines that you guys can test your own hydration when you come to work. When you get old, injuries, if you get an injury when you're old, the chance of it killing you goes up dramatically. For an example, if you are over the age of 65 and you get a hip fracture or a femur fracture, flip a coin if you're alive in a year. The numbers, depending on what you read, is somewhere between 30% and 50%. So you'll be dead within a year, and it isn't the injury itself that killed you, it's the decline in that Vo2 Max and your muscle strength and your increased chance of infection and all those other things that will kill you when you're old. So don't get injured when you're old, because the chance of it killing you is pretty high. The other thing is you got to maintain your strength in old age, because stabilizer muscles and the muscles you use to walk around matter. If you're trying to walk from your car to your house carrying your groceries, you trip over your front stair, it's going to be bad news. We're going to talk about specific muscle fibers and which ones go first, but your stabilizer muscles and all those ones that you need when you trip over something, those are your fast twitch fibers, and unfortunately those are the first to go. Osteoporosis matters because if your bones aren't healthy, then they're going to break easier. So if you're a woman, you might want to consider some hormone replacement later in life. Awesome. Infection, lower respiratory disease. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because all of us here are probably PhDs in COVID and we know how to prevent infection. A couple of notes on infection though. We did buy UV lights for all the stations, so you can go ahead and sanitize your rooms or the rigs or the offices or whatever you need. There's one at every station. The administration is going to be getting one this year as well. We just didn't purchase one for them last year. So please use them. They work well. Metabolic disease is a huge risk factor for infection. The same thing with sleep because of the immune system reduction you get with a lack of sleep. Stress matters, poor nutrition, medications, and vaccine status. COPD, we put this in here just because it is a presumptive illness. And if you have this, then obviously your VO2 max is going to go down because your lung function sucks. All right, so what are we going to do about all these problems? The wellness team's goal is all of those risk factors you saw. We want to pull every single one of those levers. I don't care if it's a $5 bill or a $10 bill. We're going to pull them all because a lot of $5 and $10 and $20 bills equal 100. But we are going to be focused on the $100 bills this year. We're going to be bringing in experts in their field when it comes to mental health and sleep and when it comes to metabolic health. They're going to be spread out throughout the quarters this year. But then we're going to talk about all of the other levers, but we're going to start with sleep. Sleep obviously is the biggest lever we can pull. We're going to recommend continuous glucose monitoring and lactate monitoring if you really want to get nerdy about it. Continuous glucose monitoring because you can what you'll find if you're wearing like a Dexcom or something is that when you're sleeping, your resting sugar is probably somewhere in the 70s or 80s. If you wake up for a call, that thing will spike to 110, 120 maybe. That is diabetic range. So getting up on a call will put your sugar up into that diabetic range. What you find also is that once you go back to sleep, it doesn't drop back down to normal again. It stays high because of the cortisol that's circulating around. We all remember Kurt Bug back in the day doing his 12 minutes of zone 2 cardio. He was washing out the cortisol by doing that and probably able to sleep better. When we get to the studies on, sleep for firefighters also show that they just, even though they're sleeping, they move around a lot more and they're not getting that deep sleep. So when you say you don't sleep well here, watching your continuous glucose monitor will tell you that. You can also check your lactate. This is kind of a pain in the butt. Lactate is, when you test it, it's just like testing blood sugar, but it's only a 60-second window. And you got to wash your hands first. But it is an option that the more glucose you have, the more lactate you're going to have floating around. So if you're having a CGM, you might not need a lactate monitor just because if sugar's up, you know your lactate's up. We have we're all going to get a wellness handbook, or there will be a wellness handbook created. There will be a chapter on everything we talked about today. We have already created the chapter on sleep. It's about 10 pages and it tells you all the ways sleep is messing with you. And then we have a 20-step sleep protocol that if you follow, it will give you the scientifically best way to get to sleep, fall asleep, and stay asleep faster. It's things like go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time every day, go outside within 10 minutes of waking up, increase your core body temperature before you fall asleep so that it will decrease because that's what helps you fall asleep. It's also going to tell you that you should have sex or masturbate to orgasm. Orgasm should be emphasized because it doesn't work if you don't. If you have a spouse that snores or keeps you awake at any point during the night, kick them out of bed. So from Matthew Walker, the sleep expert himself, you get to go home and tell your spouse, I'm going to need to have sex with you, and then you're going to need to go. There is a 20-step process, though, that you can follow to go ahead and get yourself to sleep. It even comes with a protocol that the military's been using to get their pilots to fall asleep. What they've found is that with 6 months of practice, pilots can, while sitting up, fall asleep anywhere, any time of day within 2 minutes. So it is a learned skill. It's kind of just a meditation practice, but that'll be part of the protocol as well. We're also going to recommend sleep tracking and HRV monitoring. HRV is heart rate variability. One of the biggest things that affects heart rate variability is poor sleep. You can measure those things. The most accurate one is called the Oura Ring. The Oura Ring is on the FSA store, so you can use your insurance to pay for that. HRV monitoring, what that is, because we're going to recommend that for several things, is everybody has a heart rate. So if your heart rate is 60 a minute, you got 1 a second, but that doesn't mean it's an atomic clock and going off once every second. There is a variability there measured in milliseconds. The higher the heart rate variability, the more your parasympathetic nervous system is in charge. The lower the number, the more your sympathetic nervous system is in charge. So that's your fight or flight. So you'll see that mental health problems will decrease heart rate variability. Sleep will decrease heart rate variability. Alcohol will decrease heart rate variability. Anything that makes your sympathetic nervous system activated will decrease that. So this is a way you can monitor stress or monitor sleep or even monitor recovery from workouts. A lot of professional athletes use this as a metric for whether or not they're going to do a high intensity that day or not. If you do monitor that, or you can monitor that, and you can get an Oura Ring is going to be the most accurate, but any smartwatch, Garmin has it, Apple Watch has it, they're all good, they all can track these things. The Oura Ring is the most accurate. Let's talk about start times and schedule. They have done studies on this, and the 2 levers that organizations can pull in the fire service, we know that sleep is our biggest Achilles heel in the fire service. What we know is that it doesn't matter what schedule you're on. If you're in a busy department, then obviously you're going to have worse sleep, so you can't compare like New York to Eastern Washington. New York is obviously going to be worse. But if you compare similar departments, if you change your start time to noon, your ability to sleep increases. So what the studies found is the night before shift is the worst, the night of shift is the second worst, and they're hovering around that 5-hour mark. And then, like I said before, the day after, you get a rebound and you're sleeping too much. What they found by going to noon start times is that sleep opportunity increases almost the same as the average person if you just go to a noon start time. The idea behind that is the night before shift, people tend to go to bed later because they're just in their normal cycle at home, and they all wake up early to commute into work. If that even decreasing by 1.5 hours puts you into that smoking range. So Austin Fire Department, I think, was kind of the ones to pioneer this. They went to noon start time several years ago. Their clinical psychologists saw huge reductions in mental health problems within a year by going to noon start times. So the wellness team is recommending noon start times. Schedule, same thing. They have done studies on sleep opportunity between the 24-48, 48-96, and the modified Detroit. The studies, if you look them up in the references, they call it the Kelly schedule, but it's the modified Detroit. 24-48 rules the day, that's the best. 48-96 comes in second, and modified Detroit is the worst. The reason I bring that up is the person who did those studies, his name's Dr. Joe Billings. I spoke with him, and he mentioned or implied that going from a 24-48 to a 24-72, all the metrics that make 24-48 better will probably be enhanced by a 24-72. However, no one's ever studied it. So he did give me his card and said, if as an organization we want to go to 24-72, please call him. He would love to study it because no one ever has yet. Hydration. We talked about hydration being an issue. I went around, we're going to be now using urine-specific gravity machines to measure our hydration when we come to work. If you are one of the 19 people who peed in a cup for me recently, thank you for that. Here are the numbers for us. We got 25 data points, 19 people from 3 stations. These were all done within 2 hours of starting work. What you can see is 48% of us were minimally dehydrated, 32% were significantly, only 20% of us showed up well hydrated. Unfortunately for this number, I was the second highest number. Rob Grant holds the record for the highest number. He was the most dehydrated. Unfortunately for him, he was kind of in this range here. So anyway, what this we're going to be doing is you'll see these machines trickle out to all the stations. It will be voluntary. You go in, you zero out the machine, you pee in a cup, you drop a couple of drops on there, it will give you a number. Wherever that number lies, there will be a protocol that says if you are minimally dehydrated, take 16 ounces and 600 milligrams of sodium and you will be back to well hydrated. If you're significantly dehydrated, it'll tell you to take 16 ounces and 600 milligrams and then a half hour later do the same thing and then you'll be back to well hydrated. And the higher the number, the different protocol you'll get. The biggest thing that we found in testing these people was the idea of not knowing the color of their urine equaling hydration status. If I peed in a cup and I look like this, I would have told you that was well hydrated, and it's not. If I peed in a cup and I saw that, I would have said, maybe I'm getting a little low, but that's actually significant dehydration. What they found is once you can link the color to the number over time, you can be just as good at looking at your color and guessing your hydration status. The problem is knowing what the color is supposed to look like. So the purpose of these machines is to show you what your color is supposed to look like so that over time you'll know just by looking at the color how hydrated you are. So there's a few things with hydration that are an issue. One is that everyone sweats at a different rate. We're going to be giving you a link to where you find out how much you sweat per hour. And everybody loses a different amount of sodium per liter that they sweat. The range is huge. It goes anywhere from 400 milligrams to 2 grams per liter. Right now on our rehab rig, we are using non-sugared Gatorade that has 300 milligrams of sodium in it. So that's 600 milligrams per liter. The average person sweats off 1 gram per liter, so we aren't even getting to the bottom end of the average with using Gatorade. And we're really not helping ourselves out with the no sugar because there are 2 ways that you can get sodium into your cells. One is by itself and the other is a co-transport with glucose. So you do need a little bit of glucose to help get the salt in there. So we are going to be switching to a electrolyte supplement called Drip Drop. Drip Drop has 600 milligrams per 16 ounces or 1,200 milligrams per liter. That's a little bit higher than the average, but we're going to then, that will incorporate almost everyone in our department. Not too many people get higher than that. Some do. One of the people that got tested on our wellness committee was 1,475 milligrams per liter. So they are sweating out almost 3 grams per hour on a fire scene. The average firefighter will sweat off 1.5 liters in 30 minutes of a structure fire. So if you are 1,000 milligrams, that's 1,500 milligrams you need to replace in that 30 minutes. So you can do that with 2 drip drops and 32 ounces. So you'll see the hydration protocol go out there. You'll also see a link at the end of this presentation where you can find out how much salt you sweat off and how many liters per hour you sweat. The point of this slide is that if your pee ever looks like this, go ahead and just stop doing what you're doing and rehydrate, because this is rhabdo. And anything darker than that is when LA County will pull you from the line and make you sit down and drink until you get rehydrated. This rehydration here is over the course of about 4 hours. This individual was drinking a half a liter every half hour, just like our protocol is. So this is an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and then finally he got back to where he could now go on with his day. You will see the drip drop now is going to replace Gatorade on our rehab rig. We're not going to use Gatorade anymore for those obvious reasons. The Wildland team, we're going to be recommending that they get their sweat tested and know how much sodium they are, because they can be grams off within 4 hours if they don't know. We are also providing anyone going to the fire academy with a machine and a bunch of drip drop because they matter more because they're going to be sweating all day long. Exercise, we're going to be giving an exercise protocol. We're going to be using this thing called a metabolic map to do so. Before we get into that though, the purpose of this exercise program is solely to increase VO2 max because of that lever of VO2 max to pull. But the take-home message is, if you already have an exercise program and you're already working out, just keep doing that, because something you can do every day matters way more than something you're doing every 3 days. So if you've got something that works for you and you're able to work out every day, just keep doing it, because you're going to get pretty close. The exercise protocol we're going to be giving is for those who don't really have a protocol, or they simply want to focus on increasing VO2 max. So don't think that you have to follow the protocol, but it's going to be there for those who want it, and it's going to be based on this metabolic map. This metabolic map comes from Indigo San Milan. He is the one that created heart rate zones. He's a cancer metabolic specialist who has transitioned into being a expert in sports metabolism, because metabolism works the same whether it's cancer or, sports experts trying to, or professional athletes trying to increase their VO2 max. It's all the same. So he now is consulting with 3 of the top 10 teams in the Tour de France. The guy who's won the Tour de France the last few years, he's his personal coach. This is the protocol he uses, so let's go through it here real quick. We talked about mitochondria, and it needs glucose, fat, or lactate. This is the amount in grams that the mitochondria is using, and this is your heart rate. Orange is fat, red is glucose, blue is lactate. So you can see below heart rates of 100, you are vastly using way more fat than sugar or lactate. But note that you're still using sugar, because it doesn't matter which heart rate, you're still using all 3. It just depends on where you're at in the heart rate zone, on which fuel you're using. So you can see that maximum fat oxidation is right here, somewhere around heart rate of 120 in this study. That is zone 2 cardio. So every time I talk about zone 2 cardio, I'm talking about the maximum amount of fat you can use to make ATP. We talked about how much ATP you can make from a molecule of fat. So it doesn't matter if you are a professional sports athlete or somebody who just wants to live longer, 80% of the workout is going to be in that zone. But we all know that zone 2 is easy. It's anything. Push a lawnmower, go for a walk. Zone 2 doesn't have to be on a treadmill. It's anything that'll get your heart rate into that zone. The other zone we're going to be focused on is right here. This is called lactate threshold. You can see that the faster you go, the less fat you use, the more sugar you use. The more sugar, the more lactate. At some point, though, you reach a point where your body can't recycle the lactate anymore, and it just skyrockets. That's called your lactate threshold. So about 10% of the workout protocol is going to be right there. We're going to recommend 4 minutes above and 4 minutes below. 4 minutes is not something you need to be focused on. The idea, though, is just to get above and below it, whether it's 60 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever. 60 seconds above, 60 seconds below, doesn't matter. The point is you need to go above and below. What the science says is if you can do 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off times 4 once to twice a week is going to give you the best results. You do need to recover from that high heart rate, though, so you can't just be doing that every day. That's why CrossFit workouts every day are probably not the best way to go for VO2 max, because you'll then start partitioning your mitochondria to use lactate and not as much fat. The other 5 to 10%, we're going to be recommending max heart rate. So that is anything you want to do, whether it's a bike or a run or pushing your lawnmower or adding weight and rucking. Start slow and then just go faster and faster till you can't anymore, and you step off and you get your heart rate as high as you possibly can, so that you are upregulating the mitochondria's ability to use lactate. So if we upregulate this 80% of the time, then go back and forth here in, you might have heard things like fartlek workouts for running, and then also hit here. We are hitting every single way the mitochondria make ATP and upregulating that the best way we know how to increase VO2 max. So that is why when it comes to cardio, that's what you'll be recommending. But again, you don't have to follow it. If you've got a protocol, just use it. Get rid of your riding lawnmower and push a lawnmower and you're there, right? You don't have to do much. For numbers' sake, to go from low VO2 max, where you saw was the worst hazard ratio as far as health outcomes go, to below average or average, you only need to do 150 minutes a week. That's not much. That is mowing a big lawn. It's not a lot you have to do to get to be average. So you don't, I mean, the more you move, the better it is, but really you don't have to do much to get the most benefit. Down here is where strength is going to come in. These are muscle fibers. These are type 1 muscle fibers. Type 1 are your slow twitch. Though type 1 muscle fibers have the most density of mitochondria, they are mitochondria rich. So so these are the muscles you're going to be using in zone 2 for most of the time. Type 2A are fast twitch muscle fibers. They have less mitochondria, so they require more energy to fire off and contract. So you need higher heart rates, more glucose. That's where that workout here comes in. These are type 2B fibers. They have very little mitochondria at all, and they need a whole lot of sugar to fire off. Think box jumps versus climbing the stairs. These are fast twitch muscle fibers. As we age, these go away first, then these, and then these. So the old people that were picking up off the floor because they can't lift themselves up off the floor, but once they get up, they can start walking around just fine. They've lost these, and they've lost these, and they're knocking on the door of the nursing home because this is all they have left. So it doesn't matter how old you are, though. You can affect these muscle fibers, but the older you get, the harder it becomes to affect them. So muscle does decline after age about 35 to 40. So we will be giving strength workouts recommendations based on these muscle fiber types and which heart rate you need to get into to fire them off. So think high intensity workouts here, and think 3 sets of 10 bench press here when you start looking at the workout recommendations. But do remember that this right here, even though that you're in zone 2 and you're using primarily fat, we're still using glucose and lactate. The reason why that's important is because the person we're having come in is this guy. His name's Michael McKnight. He is arguably the best in the world at adjusting mitochondria using diet and exercise. He uses a process called optimized fat metabolism. If you can use that process, you must be a professional athlete because it requires things like carb timing, intermittent fasting, using keto diet strategically, only taking in carbs at certain heart rate zones. It is a hard diet to follow, so don't necessarily recommend it. But the reason why he's one of the best in the world is because being on this diet for a few years, he decided it might be a good idea to prove to the world he can produce 10 METs of energy for 24 hours using nothing but his own body fat for fuel. So he ran 118 miles in 24 hours, fasted, dipping his finger in elemental electrolytes because he couldn't even take tablets because the tablet itself has a calorie or two. So he was tested. The reason why I said he's arguably the best is because he's the only one that's ever been tested to do it. And they showed, sure enough, his sugar stayed steady, which you can see from that metabolic chart. Most people are still using sugar at those low heart rates. He wasn't using any. He was strictly using fat and then the ketones from it for energy, and producing METs equivalent to the VO2 max of most 45-year-olds. So he's going to come in, and we're going to have a whole class on how you can affect metabolism and your mitochondria using diet and exercise. So that'll be the first half of the class. The second half will be him telling us his protocol, and not necessarily to follow it, but just how you can use diet and exercise to affect it. Now, we just told you that optimized fat metabolism probably not what you're going to be able to do. So we are going to, and we know that diet is super important for mitochondrial health. So we are bringing in a registered dietitian. She is also a nutritionist. She also takes our insurance and is in Gig Harbor, so if you want to use her personally for diet, you can. What we've asked her to do is not tell us which diet is better, but to tell us what does everyone need, and whatever diet that they choose, what are the pros and cons. Because when you look at studies on diet, what all of them say is it doesn't matter which one you're on, volume matters the most. So your resting metabolic rate, how many calories you burn every day, matters way more than the composition of those calories. It doesn't matter if you eat lettuce. If you eat 5,000 calories of lettuce a day, you're still going to get fat. You're probably going to get a bowel obstruction first from the fiber, but you will get fat because you're simply taking in more calories and your body's going to turn it into fat. So volume matters the most, and this is where CPET Vo2 Max testing comes in, because not only will it give you the actual heart rate that you're in zone 2 and the actual heart rate that you are at your lactate threshold, but it will also tell you your resting metabolic rate, and it will tell you how you partition out fuels, whether when you're at rest, if you're using more fats or carbs or protein. And so you can say, hey, whatever my diet is, I'm off over here. I'm not eating enough carbs, and so my body's catabolizing protein. So maybe I need to decrease protein, increase carbs. So that's where CPET Vo2 Max testing comes in. But outside of volume, composition, the only thing that matters is the amount of protein. Most of the studies just say the less protein you get, the worse off it is for you. This is a typo. It should say 0.8 grams per kilogram. But the recommendations from the Food and Drug Administration is 0.8 grams per kilogram per day for a person. But this is a person at rest. This isn't us. This isn't us in the fire service. Us in the fire service need closer to a gram a pound of protein. So outside of volume and protein, it doesn't really matter what diet you're on. So what we've asked her to do, she is going to be writing the chapter for our wellness handbook. And it will be saying things like, if you want to be on the keto diet, that's cool. You should probably drink more water and where you're getting your fiber from. If you want to be a vegetarian, cool. Are you getting enough BCAAs to account for your protein content? So pick a diet, because whichever one you can stick to that focuses on calories in, calories out, that's the best diet that works. It doesn't matter if you want to be on the Mediterranean diet and be like the Blue Zone people. If you only do it every other day, it doesn't work. So whatever one you can stick to it, and then know the pros and cons. Take out your phones if you like. This is the National Firefighter Registry. This is a 20-year study funded by the NIH. The purpose of this study is to simply identify who is a firefighter and what is the risk of cancer. One of the problems with all the studies on cancer and firefighters is they just don't know who's a firefighter. Once you retire, on your cause of death, or on your death certificate, they don't just say firefighter. And unless you are a line of duty death, sometimes they don't even say that if you die when you're on the job. So the purpose of this study, it's a 20-year study. It will be funded for 20 years. They just want to know who's a firefighter, and will you please just tell us that you are, so that when you die, we know and we can do actual studies on cancer. It is kind of a pain in the butt. Takes about a half hour. You do have to give your social security number, because that's how they're going to track you. But if you would like, there's the QR code for that. When we talked about cognitive reserve for neurodegenerative disease and how important that is, this is a website called Brain HQ. It's the only one that they have tons of studies on that says if you play their games, you will increase your cognitive reserve. You will make more neural connections. You can't just go play Scrabble all day long, because you'll just get good at playing Scrabble. You do have to learn something new or do something new to make those connections. So this is just a website. It is a paid site, but they are the ones that come backed by science. And basically it's like $6 a month. You just play games like any other game, and then it helps neural connections. I've done a couple of them. They're actually kind of fun. The other thing we're going to be recommending is the Memory Palace. The Memory Palace is another way you can increase cognitive reserve. The reason why we're recommending that is because of the skill set you get from it. One of the things we have in our fire department is the fact that we're getting bigger. We have 178 people that work for us, and I don't know half their names. The Memory Palace is hippocampus focused, which is where memory comes from. And it has been shown to increase cognitive reserve. The Memory Palace will give you the superhuman ability to remember more things than you think you can. So if you want to remember everybody's name here, you'll not only be able to remember their names, but you'll remember their kids' names, their wife's names, their hobbies, everything about them pretty quickly. Not that it doesn't take much time. And you'll have that in your memory for life. You can also use it for things like memorizing pump charts or memorizing our policies if you want to promote up. We'll give you a book if you want to learn that skill. It is a learned skill, which is why it increases cognitive reserve, but the biggest factor is it is hippocampus focused, and memory is a problem with Alzheimer's. Plus it'll give you a cool skill to impress your friends. So these two things right here, this is Science to the Station, aka the Science Alliance. These are researchers at all of the main institutions whose primary goal is to look at peer-reviewed studies on firefighters and anything that has to do with their health. They've created a website, so you can go to Science to the Station. Dr. Sarah Jenke, who we are bringing in, sits on the board of this organization as well. You can go to their website. You will also see infographics that are already being put up at all the stations on all the boards. All of those infographics come from them. Since they are the ones doing the studies, they know the best. So you'll see things on the boards. They're going to be constantly rotating, but there are things like marijuana use. What are the good things? What are the bad things? Alcohol use, obesity, heart disease, whatever it is. Rob has already started distributing that stuff. There's also Crackle Magazine. This is the journal who is solely dedicated to health issues in the fire service. It is a once every 3-month journal. We have purchased one for every station, so you'll see Crackle magazines at all the stations. It is free to go there. They're online versions, so you can use a QR code if you like, and it's free there, but we have ordered paper copies for all of the stations, so you will see those being distributed shortly when they get here. We ordered those 2 weeks ago. These three, this is DexaFit Seattle. For $360, you will get your CPET Vo2 Max test. That test will give you your resting metabolic rate. It'll give you all your heart rate zones, and they will even tell you a workout program for you that will increase your Vo2 Max the best based on your heart rate. They will also give you a DEXA scan. That DEXA scan will give you what your fat and lean body mass is. In our wellness physicals, they're going to be using calipers, but it's really tough to put a caliper on a kidney. So the only way to know what your visceral fat is to get a DEXA scan. And since visceral fat is the thing that matters when it comes to overall health, you need a DEXA scan for that. This is a national company. The reason why we chose them, because they're only $360. You get the CPET Vo2 Max test, you get the DEXA scan, but wait, there's more. They will also give you a 3D body scan of your muscles. They'll have you stand there, they'll look at your gait and tell you where you're off posture-wise, which muscles you can expect to get sore over time, and how to fix those things. So you get all of that for $360. There is other places in Seattle you can go that will just give you the CPET Vo2 Max test. It's like $400 or $500, so it's more expensive. You don't get as much. You can also do a DEXA scan with them without doing the other two things, and it's like $30. Or you can just get that 3D body scan for like $20 or something. But if you want all three, that's the cost. So that's where you would go to get that. We've had one person use them and one person use a different CPET Vo2 Max. One thing we found was the predicted resting metabolic rate was consistently off by about 300 calories a day. Why that matters is because if you go with the predicted, say like Dr. Campbell told us, or what our current wellness physical will be telling us, if you're off by 300 calories a day, that's 1 pound of fat every 10 days. So if you, there's 3,500 calories in a pound of fat, so if you're off by 300, I guess that's more than 10 days, but in that 10-day mark. The reason why I say that is because obesity, the vast majority of firefighters are overweight or obese, and so if we're following the letter to a T, we don't want to be gaining weight. So if you get your CPET Vo2 Max with this company, they will tell you what your predicted will say, and then they will tell you what your actual is. And it's the two that we've had done have been off by 300 calories. And that's to the bad, 300 overestimation. This is precision hydration sweat testing. This is the only commercially available company right now that will test your sweat and tell you exactly how much sodium you sweat off. You can get little strips off of Amazon, but it's a color coded thing, and it's real hard to narrow in the exact. It's kind of a range, and depending if you're colorblind, it sucks, or is that purple or green? I don't know. This company will actually take an electrode to your forearm. They'll shock you a little bit, and then they'll stick a thing that sucks off your sweat, and then they will tell you. You don't have to get on a treadmill or anything. You just sit there for 5 minutes, and they'll tell you exactly how much you sweat off. It's $150. The closest one is in Portland, unfortunately, but he did say he would travel if you get more than 8 people. He will not give us a discount, but he will travel up here, so we don't have to travel down there. We will be recommending that the Wildland team or everyone on it get this done because of the salt issues. But if you want to get it done on your own, it's $150, or if you group together to get Avia, he'll come up and do it. This is a sweat loss calculator. What you can do is get naked and weigh yourself, and then put back on clothes if you want to, and go run around or do some exercise that will make you sweat a lot for an hour. Don't take any food or drink in, and then go step on the scale, weigh yourself, put in your numbers, and it will tell you how many liters per hour you sweat off. So if you want to know that range is huge. I personally sweat the most I've seen, and my wife sweats the least, so we're almost a liter per hour off between the two of us. She needs 1 liter less per hour than I do, which is crazy to me. And then you can just do the math then. If you're sweating off, say, a gram per liter, and you sweat a liter per hour, you need a liter and a gram of sodium every hour, and you're going to be fine. These are some books you can read. This is Why We Sleep. This gentleman, Matthew Walker, is pretty much the GOAT when it comes to sleep science. He's done the most studies and is part of who we went to come up with our sleep protocol. He's the one that you will point to when you tell your wife to have sex with me and get out of bed. He also has a podcast, and there it is. This is outlived by longevity expert Peter Attia. He also has a podcast called The Drive, but if you go to that website, his podcast is solely dedicated to longevity and everything around it. This book will give you pretty much everything I said for 4 of those things. He only has 4 things that will kill you, but we're firefighters, so we had to add a few just for our risk factors. This is Moonwalking with Einstein. This is the book that will teach you how to do the memory palace. It is a book by a reporter who went to the memory championship, said they all had identical memories, and they were superhumans, and they said, no, it's just a learned skill. He said, prove it. They said, give us an hour a day for a year. We'll make you the champion. He did. He spent an hour a day and came back and set the world record the next year. So he will teach you how to do the memory palace. Take home, when you get to the chapter on how to remember things, skip it, or else, unless you want to know what Betty White looks like naked in cottage cheese, because that's still in my brain and I can't get it out. This is Lessons from the Blue Zones. It goes through all of the reasons why those people live longer, but we just told you why science says that. But if you are just interested in more, there's the book for that. So some of the recommendations. Somebody on the wellness committee is going to be doing one of these things or are doing one of these things right now. And when we have a small class on these things, we're going to be coming in and telling you our experience with it and what's good and bad. For instance, Rob in facilities has been doing cold plunging, and he came to me after about a week and said, dude, I just cannot sleep when I cold plunge. And I said, why? That's going to make it better, actually. And he's like, well, I don't know. I cold plunge and then I try to fall asleep and I'm wide awake. I'm like, you're doing this at night? It's the exact opposite of what you should be doing, because that spikes cortisol. And he's like, oh, morning, got it. So he switched back to doing it in the morning, and he's doing much better. But just little tips throughout the day. So continuous glucose monitors, you can go to your doctor, get a script. They pretty much will give you one because we are shift workers and the metabolic health that goes with that. I just told her what I did for a living, and she's like, sure, here's your prescription. They are pretty cool because it'll also tell you, not only can you track your sleep and how well you slept, but it'll tell everybody processes sugars different, and different foods turn into glucose differently. For instance, when I eat potato chips, it will spike my sugar way higher than if I eat Reese's Pieces, which was crazy to me. But everybody's a little different, so you can watch your glucose spike depending on what you eat, and then you can dial in your nutrition that way as well. Sauna works for just about everything to do with health. If you go to the study we've linked to, it's a review. They actually looked at thousands of studies, and pretty much every body system is affected positively by sauna. Temperature matters and time matters. I almost put sauna as one of the biggest levers you can pull because the longest study on them showed a 40% decrease in all-cause mortality if you do sauna, which is pretty much the same as smoking. However, the study was done in people in Finland who tended to be healthier anyway, and so they called it healthy user bias, and healthy people don't die young, so of course they had a decrease. So we weren't able to put it in there as a lever to pull, but every study done on saunas seems to point to a positive reaction. Time and temperature matter. If you want 100% of the benefits, you're going to need a Finnish sauna that goes to like 190, 195. You still get a ton of benefits using infrared, but those tend to cap out at like 150. So for instance, you want to increase some HGH, you're going to need to go at least above 175, so you'll need a Finnish sauna. So not all saunas are the same, but you're going to get benefits from most of them. Cold plunging, we're going to be recommending. We aren't getting cold tubs though, because turning your faucet to cold gets you pretty darn close. 48 to 52 degrees is generally the studies. At the end of the day, the colder you are, the shorter you need to be in the cold, and the hotter it is, the longer you need to be in. But if you're at the cold water temperatures here in the Northwest, 2 minutes. So the recommendation is take your morning shower, the last 2 minutes turn it to cold, and then warm up naturally. Don't jump into a hot tub or something. Heart rate variability monitoring we mentioned, lactate monitoring we mentioned, and then obviously you're going to get these protocols. We will be doing new wellness physicals this year. We went away from Dr. Campbell and we're going to a company called LifeScan. It is a way more intensive physical. It will take about 3 hours, so prepare for 3 hours and bring your workout clothes. They will be putting you on a treadmill and be doing EKGs and treadmill tests. You'll also be meeting with exercise physiologists and nurse practitioners to go over blood work. That will be in November. We've created a wellness email group, so if you have any questions for the wellness team or suggestions or things that you have heard, this could be healthy, will you look it up? We will do that. Just email us. You're going to see those infographics on the station boards. We also created a wellness handbook, or are currently creating one. There are going to be chapters on everything we just talked about. There is already a spot on the union website and the intranet for us to put that. So you will see that shortly. So if you want to go get any of this information, including this PowerPoint and the references for it and all the links, just go there and that's where it'll be. We talked about this and Crackle Magazine. And with that, any questions on anything?